enjoy traveling, but one of my favorite things to do is to be the person who plans the trip. I like to book the airline tickets and the hotel, to pick where we're going to stay and where we're going to stop, what we're going to eat, to choose the playlist for the road trip. And it doesn't matter if it's a youth group outing or a family vacation or a road trip with my friends. I like to be the one who calls the shots. But there is something difficult about being the decision maker. It's tough to make decisions that don't just fall into what you want, but also are things that other people want. That you don't just play the music you like and go to the restaurants that you want to go to and do the things that you want to do. When you're on a trip with your friends or your family or your youth group, it's important that you take into consideration the needs of everyone involved. And that's really hard to do, because a lot of us, the reason we want to be the decision maker is because we want to make decisions that benefit us, that we like, that are the way we want things. For the last few weeks, we've been talking about the most important rule that God ever gave us. Some people make the mistake of thinking that following Jesus means you have to follow like 1,000 rules. There's all these rules and laws about how you're supposed to live. But Jesus said there's one law that matters, the law of love, that you love God and love others as yourself. And this sounds easy enough to love. Oh, sure, I can be loving, I can love God, I can love other people. But sometimes it's really difficult. It's difficult to prioritize the needs of other people. And it's difficult when someone's wronged you or broken your trust or done something to harm you, to want to offer forgiveness and love and grace to them. In Matthew chapter 18, we read about one time when Jesus was hanging out with his closest followers, and one of them, named Peter, comes up to him and says, "Lord, how many times should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? See, Peter probably thought he was being generous. I know if someone wrongs me 2, 3, 4 times, I'm done with them. So he's saying, hey, look, if someone wrongs me 5 times, 6 times, even 7 times, I'm willing to forgive. That's enough, right, Jesus? And he probably expected Jesus to say, good job, Peter, you get it. 7 times is more than we could ever expect from anyone to forgive someone else. But this is what Jesus says. He says, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. In other words, Peter, you need to forgive someone so often that you lose track of how often you've forgiven them. I know you're not going to be counting up, all right, that's 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 20, 50, 70 times. At some point, you're going to lose count because you're not keeping score anymore. Jesus goes on to tell a story about a king who forgave a servant a huge debt, a debt that was so big that he could work his entire lifetime, 2 or 3 lifetimes, and never be able to afford to pay it off. And the guy was so gracious. He was so loving toward this servant. This king was just so forgiving of him that he just wipes away this debt. Well, the servant goes out and he sees someone who owes him a very small amount of money. And he says, you need to pay me right now. And the person couldn't. And so he says, I'm going to throw you in jail. I'm going to have you and your family arrested because you can't pay me what you owe me. Well, when the king heard about this, he was furious because the servant didn't realize that the forgiveness that he had been given for such a great amount needed to be extended to other people. It should have impacted the way he thought and lived. See, we can't just like the idea of love. We have to actually put it into practice. And sometimes it's not as simple to do as we'd like it to be. It's hard to be forgiving, but we need to keep in mind that we are people who have been forgiven of a ton. If you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, you know we've been talking about James quite a bit. He was the brother of Jesus and the leader, one of the leaders of the early church in Jerusalem during the early years of the Jesus movement. He even wrote a book that made it into the Bible that we call the Book of James. And in this letter that he wrote to early Christians, he's telling us what it looks like to practice the law of love, to live out the law that God actually calls us to love God and to love other people. Now James wasn't a king, but he was a powerful, important person. And when disputes and controversies rose up in the early church, oftentimes he was one of the people who would have a big say in how those things would be resolved. And he had a reputation for being wise and just in how he handled this. The very first followers of Jesus were from a Jewish background. They practiced the Hebrew faith. And they believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the anointed one that God had promised in the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures. And as the movement of Jesus followers spread and grew, people from other religious and ethnic backgrounds started following Jesus. Now, some of these early Jewish Christians said, well, if you're going to follow Jesus, the first thing you have to do is actually become Jewish. And you have to follow all of the Old Testament, the Hebrew laws, if you're going to follow Jesus correctly. Other Jesus followers believed that the only thing you really needed to do was to follow Jesus, to love God and to love other people. So James listens to this dispute, this debate carefully. He heard all the perspectives and he made a decision. And he decided that no one should be forced to go through all these difficult steps if they were going to follow Jesus. Did that decision make James comfortable? Was it easy for him? Probably not. See, James grew up Jewish. He grew up valuing those laws, those rules, that culture. But James's commitment to following Jesus required that he love other people, even people who were different than him, who had a different perspective than him, who had different life experiences, that he needed to be kind and gracious towards those people. See, James decided his discomfort about the way they were approaching the law was not as important as loving other people. Listen to what James wrote in James chapter 2, verses 12 and 13. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged by the law of freedom. For judgment will be merciless to the one who has shown no mercy. And I love this. It says, mercy triumphs over judgment. See, we can say that we have the freedom to treat people however we want to, that we're free as free people to be unkind, to be ungracious, to hold people to a higher standard than we want to be held to ourselves. But Jesus said that the most important thing we could do, in addition to loving God, was to love others as we love ourselves. See, that's why James says that it's so important to show mercy instead of judgment. See, all of us, we want mercy shown to us, but it's hard to extend mercy and forgiveness to other people. But we will never live freely as long as we're only living for ourselves. Throughout life, you're going to have plenty of chances where you're going to be the person in charge, the person making the rules and making the decisions. So when you're in charge, what should you do with all of that power? Well, you're going to be tempted to use it for your own gain, to do things that only benefit you. But instead, you need to follow James's example. You need to be wise. You need to be merciful. You need to be loving. You need to use your power to benefit other people and not just yourself. But this isn't something you have to wait till some distant future to be able to put into practice. See, each and every one of us make decisions every day. You choose how you treat your family. You choose how you treat your friends and strangers and teachers and authority figures and people at school and people in your community. You choose how you're going to use your time and your money and your resources and your talents. And you need to realize that the way you prioritize things right now will set the course for your life. If you're prioritizing yourself over others, your needs, your comfort, your wishes over other people, that probably isn't going to change anytime soon. You're not going to suddenly wake up one day and start caring about other people. You need to let that journey start now, where you prioritize the needs of other people ahead of your own. See, free people make decisions that benefit others.